In this video, I'm going to teach you 3 fruit tree training techniques: Cordon, Espalier, and fan training. Now these are all brilliantly easy ways to make your fruit trees take up less space while still being incredibly productive. You can use this technique on fruit trees growing in the ground or in containers, but there is one really important thing that you need to know, and that is not all fruit trees are suitable for training. This technique is really only appropriate for trees that are growing on dwarfing or semi-dwarfing rootstock. That means trees that are going to stay nice and small. So any of your patio or dwarf fruit tree varieties or anything growing on that dwarfing or semi-dwarfing rootstock is perfect for this technique. Different varieties of fruit trees produce their fruit in a slightly different position on the tree, and that means that not every shape of fruit tree training is suitable for every type of fruit tree. Your fruit trees fall into 3 broad categories. There are tip-bearing, spur-bearing, and partial tip-bearing. So these are fruit trees that are both tip-bearing and spur-bearing on the same tree. Your spur-bearing fruit trees are your apples, your pears, your quinces, and your crab apples. And these produce fruit on tiny little mini branches called spurs that come off of the main branch. And those little spurs continue to produce fruit year after year after year after year. So that means that you can create a lovely established framework, and just with a bit of light pruning, keep that shape for years, and your tree will continue to be productive. So all of your spur-bearing fruit trees can be trained into pretty much any shape that you want to train them into, and they will look amazing and be really productive. Your tip-bearing fruit trees. Now these are your peaches, your nectarines, and your sour or acid cherries. Not your sweet cherries, they're different, just your sour or acid cherries. Now these flower and produce fruit on young wood, on new growth. So every summer, after you have harvested the fruit, you need to be cutting those trees back by quite a bit to encourage new growth. I'm just going to do a whole separate video on pruning because it's a whole thing. There are exceptions. I'm sure someone in the comments is going to tell me that their specific variety is spur-bearing, and that's fantastic. But as a general rule of thumb, for all of your tip-bearing fruit, all of your stone fruit, you are much better to choose a fan shape rather than an espalier. When you have a fan shape, you can easily cut back the branches every year to encourage new growth. Now there are also partial tip-bearing fruit trees. These are your plums, your apricots, and your sweet cherries. So these do produce some fruiting spurs, and they also fruit on tips, on new growth. So you can espalier train these, or you can fan train them. Generally, your citrus and your figs are also tip-bearing, so they do really well in the fan trained shape. And just for the record, your red currants, black currants, white currants, and your gooseberries also respond really well to fan training, but that is definitely a separate video. For this video, what you need to remember is you can cordon train your apples, your pears, your quinces, your crab apples. You can espalier train your apples, your pears, your quinces, your crab apples, your plums, your apricots, and your sweet cherries. And you can fan train absolutely everything. So all of those apples, pears, quinces, plums, apricots, sweet cherries, crab apples, and you can also fan train peaches, nectarines, sour cherries, berry bushes, citrus, and figs. Pretty much any fruit tree, as long as it's got a small enough growth habit, you can fan train it. You can absolutely train a fruit tree in a container. It's a great way to save space, but there's a couple of considerations. One is how you're going to create a support structure to train your tree onto. So you want a wall or a fence or a trellis or something that you can attach your tree to, because there's not really a lot of room in the container to be sticking a whole lot of stakes to try and give you a support structure. The second thing is, if your tree needs to be put into a bigger pot, and I've done a video on how to do that for you, it's in the description, or you can click the link. if your tree needs to go into a bigger pot, do that before you start the training. Don't stick it in a huge massive pot, just stick it in a pot a little bit bigger than what it is in if it needs to be potted on. They may not need to be. Depending on how big and mature your tree is, the way that you use these techniques is slightly different. You can start these techniques with either a maiden whip. That's like a tree sapling that is just basically one long trunk with pretty much no branches coming off of it. That's called a maiden whip. And you can start all of your training with a tree like that, or you can start with a more mature tree, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. If you know that you want to train your fruit tree, it is worth thinking about how you want to train it from day one, so that you can purchase a tree that already has roughly the right number of branches, or branches in roughly the right configuration, and then you can get off to a head start. Now, this little apple tree is going to help me demonstrate the different training techniques for you. As you can see, we have spared no expense with the backdrop so that you can see the branches nice and easily. So the first training technique is a cordon. This takes up the least room of any of the training techniques because it is literally just one single stem, like a cordon. Now, if you look at the trunk of this tree, you'll see that it has little clusters of leaves, and eventually it would have little clusters of flowers right along the trunk. So even with absolutely no branches, you will still get fruit. Now, to turn a tree like this into a cordon, what you would do is select a nice strong vertical branch and cut off all of the rest of them. So you would cut all of those off and just have that one single stem, single trunk going all the way up, and you would trim off all of the branches around it. Now, it will get the odd little sort of side shoot or spur coming off, and that is what you want. Those are what produce the fruit for you. So you don't want to strip it right back to the trunk. You want to let it have those little spurs, those little side shoots coming off, so that you can get your fruit. Now, you absolutely can grow your cordon as a upright, vertical, dead straight tree. There are a couple of drawbacks to that. One is it can only get so tall before it's hard for you to reach the fruit, whereas if it's at a 45-degree angle, there's a lot more of the tree within easy reach. The other thing is that trees have hormones, and the hormones tell the branches what to do. The tall vertical growing branches have got lots of hormones that say grow really tall, get up, get as much sunshine as you can. The more horizontal branches have got lots of hormones saying let's make flowers, let's make fruit. So you can trick your cordons into producing more of that flowering, fruiting hormone by, instead of planting it vertically, planting it on an angle. And that is going to concentrate more of the plant's hormones into giving you delicious fruit and less into just telling it to grow as big as it can. So when you're planting your cordon, you can plant several of these side by side up against a wall, so you can grow lots of different fruit varieties, and you can plant them all at that same slight angle, and they actually look really smart. If you're starting with a maiden whip, it's sometimes just called a whip or called an unfeathered maiden. It's basically a year-old tree. It will look something like this, just one single stem, no branches coming out of the top at all. So this is a really excellent way to start your fruit tree training, because from this starting point you can turn your tree into absolutely anything. So now we're ready to start training our whip, and the way that you do that for cordon, for espalier and for fan training all starts the same way. Even though a cordon is just one long straight stem, and you could leave that as one long straight stem, generally it will perform better if your cordon, instead of being dead straight, is at a 45-degree angle. And the best and the easiest way to do that is to look on the stem. Now you'll see this one's got leaves on it, so it makes it nice and easy to see. Where those leaves are little buds that have the potential to form a new branch. If it's in the winter, if you look along the stem, you'll see little bumps, and those little bumps are those tiny little buds just waiting to burst into life to be a new branch. So all you want to do is go 30 to 40 centimeters, a foot or a bit more up the length of the trunk, and you want to find one of those little buds that is facing in the direction that you want your cordon to go at its 45-degree angle. Get yourself a clean, sharp pair of secateurs, always clean and sharp, and you just simply want to cut above that bud. Rather than cutting it horizontally, it's better to cut at an angle, as this will allow rain to fall off of the cut, so it will heal faster. When that bud wakes up in the spring, it is encouraged to send out a new branch, and that branch can be trained at that 45-degree angle with the simple expedient of either using a single cane or tying it into a fence or a trellis. So that is your first option. That will take up the least space of anything. You will get a slightly smaller harvest because obviously there are fewer branches and that single trunk can only do so much, but you will be surprised at how much fruit you can get from that single cordon. So the next one that we are going to look at is called an espalier. Now this is a beautiful technique where you have a single vertical trunk and then lots of horizontal layers coming off from that vertical trunk. It's very classic, it's very structural, again looks beautiful against a wall, or you can use it even as a sort of fencing or hedging within the garden to divide areas of the garden if you've got plenty of space. Espalier is ideal for your apples and pears and quinces. For espalier fruit trees, this is the configuration that you want for your support structure. So you want horizontal wires or canes, or if you've got a fence that has a trellis on it, you can just use that. But basically you want something that's actually at the line where your different layers of branches are going to be. Now these should be a minimum of a foot or 30 centimeters apart. 16 inches I always think is just about right. So somewhere between 1 and 2 foot, 30 and 60 centimeters is going to give you some nice spacing, because remember, you're not going to have just really close cropped little horizontal lines of branches. There are going to be those little spurs, those little fruiting mini branches that come off of those main branches. So if they're squished too close together, those fruiting spurs are going to be congested and you're actually going to end up with less fruit. So trust me, give them that space so that you've got room for those fruiting spurs, room for that fruit to get all of its sunlight and ventilation, and you will have a better crop for having fewer of those rows of horizontal branches rather than trying to squish in as many as you can. Now, once you have got your support structure in place, you're going to start tying in your first layers of branches. Now you can see with this tree we have a few options for our first row of branches. We've got a couple of little spindly ones down here, but one of them is really facing toward the back of the tree. We've got two good strong branches there that are in just about the right position, and then you can see we've got two vertical branches coming up from the top. So these two branches at the bottom here really are not in the right position. The two just above are much better placed. Now let's say for argument's sake we didn't have these branches and we were going to use this little spindly one down here at the bottom for our first layer. As soon as you bend that out horizontally, it has fewer of those growth hormones and it will grow really slowly. In fact, you can see it's naturally quite horizontal, which is probably why it's so small and spindly. So when you're tying your branches in, you don't want to lie them completely flat until they are already at the length that you want them to be. So if you were going to tie this branch in, you would let that little end section stay vertical, and that will encourage it to keep growing, and then next season you can tie that end down flat. But because we're not going to be using that branch, I'm going to cut it off right back at the trunk. So you want to always use clean, sharp secateurs. Remember, if you have a stone fruit, a cherry or a plum, don't cut it in the winter. Wait until late spring or summer. That's because there's particular fungi and bacteria that attack those stone fruit plants. So the wounds from cutting need to be able to heal really quickly to stop those coming in. So that's why you need to wait for summer. But apples, pears, you can cut those any time of year. So we've got clean, sharp secateurs. We don't need that branch, so we're going to cut it off right back at the trunk, just like that. Now this branch at the back, really it's not on our vertical plane, it's growing out towards the back, it's in the wrong spot. So we're going to snip that one off as well. Now it's time to start tying in branches. So you can either use good old garden twine or you can use little plant ties. Now, if you're using plant ties, if you want to use wire, something like this soft rubber wrapped wire is okay, but don't use just wire on its own because that's going to cut into the branches. Now remember that the plant hormones will stop this branch from growing very much once I stretch it out horizontally. So if you are going to lie it completely flat, make sure that it is already the length that you want it to be. If it's not long enough yet, you can actually just not tie it in at all, just leave it to continue growing a bit longer, or you can tie it in at the bottom and actually bend it up at the edge. Don't worry, as long as you don't leave it like that for years and years, you will later on be able to bend it flat again. But if it's just shorter than you want it to be, if you leave the end of that branch growing, pointing upwards, it will grow for you much better than if you leave it down on the horizontal. So what I'm going to do is tie this around my little support, gently bend my branch down, and just loosely tie in that branch. You can see we already have that lovely horizontal plane there. Just going to do the same on the other side. If you have a more mature tree with really thick branches, you may need to just bend it part of the way, leave it a couple of weeks, part of the way, leave it a couple of weeks, part of the way, and then get it all the way down like that. But these are lovely young supple branches. Now that's still sticking up a little bit at the end, so I'm just going to put a second tie on it. That is your first layer of lovely horizontal branches all in place. So what do we do about the second layer? Well, this is going to sound brutal, but you need to choose one or the other of these to continue to be your trunk. Now you can see there actually was another branch here at some point that's been snapped off. I would be inclined to go with this because it is the most in line with the bottom trunk. And you can see along the trunk there's little bumps, little knobs or little clusters of leaves. Those are where the growing hormone is for the plant. So when you cut, you want to cut just above one of those little bumps or notches, and that little bump or notch, as soon as the top is cut off, is going to be activated to start growing new branches. Now, what you would do is cut off whichever branch you weren't going to use. Right, so pretend that branch has just been completely cut off and all we have is our two horizontal branches and this one growing up the middle. You would look along that stem and you would find your little bumps and you would cut just above where those bumps are, in line or a little below in line with where you want your next layer to be. Now, believe it or not, when you do that, usually you will get 3 new little stems that start to grow from where you have cut the branch. So you cut your branch off and then leave it. Wait for those 3 little branches to grow. When they first sprout, you will have 3 branches all growing in sort of a rough, natural shape. You will tie 2 of them down and let the 3rd continue to grow if you want another layer, or you just cut off the 3rd and just keep the 2 if you're only going 2 layers. You can go as high as you like, you can go as many layers as you like, just continually cutting off that top layer and then waiting for those 3 branches to grow. Now remember about the plant hormones, so you're better to let those branches grow for a year rather than tying them in when they're just tiny little short things. Let them grow for a year, even 2 years, and then tie them down into their horizontal form. Remember to check those little ties at least twice a year because those branches are going to continue to grow and swell as the tree matures. And so if you have them tied really tightly, you're going to do damage to them and they won't grow as well. So check and loosen and adjust your plant ties often. It is not an overnight process. It takes a few years to get a really good espalier tree because you're basically waiting for it to grow each new layer for you. But it is so worth it, especially with a lovely long-lived plant like a pear. That tree could live for 100 years. If you are starting with a whip and want to create an espalier or a fan-trained tree, they both start the same way. You find a spot 30 to 40 centimeters, a foot or a little more, up the trunk of the tree that has got 2 or 3 of those little buds, and you cut just above it. So I'm going to do that right now. Got my nice clean sharp secateurs. We're going to find a spot here that has got some nice little buds for me. And I'm going to cut just above it. So this is our trunk. This is going to form the base of the tree. And then up the top here, we will hopefully get 1, 2, 3 new shoots. When your little tree wakes up in the spring, hopefully with any luck, it is going to sprout 3 new branches for you. And then you can train it just as I've shown you on the more mature tree. Now, I know you will think to yourself, I am never going to get 3 shoots, it's only going to send 1 up. But honestly, every time I have done this without fail, it has produced 3 shoots. Now, if you're really unlucky and either your mature tree or your maiden whip does not sprout the number of branches that you want it to, there is a technique called notching that you can use to encourage it to grow a new branch for you exactly where you want it to. Notching encourages the bud directly underneath it to start growing. So you're going to need a clean, sharp blade. You select the bud that you want, and you're going to make 2 cuts, 1 horizontal cut and 1 semicircle, so you're making a crescent shape. So you start with your horizontal cut, and you're only cutting through the bark. You're not aiming to cut the wood. So you can see there your little horizontal cut. And then you're going to make a second cut, making a crescent shape, again just through the bark, not into the wood. We remove that section of bark, then you can see your little crescent shaped slice, and that little slice is going to encourage the bud directly underneath it to start growing. So you only need to do this if the tree does not naturally start to sprout where you want it to. The third technique that I'm going to show you is fan training. This is very elegant, again beautiful to do against a wall or a fence. It is a single trunk with several branches trained out in a fan. Now, this tree was actually got with fan training in mind, and as you can see, it already has branches in sort of loosely a fan type shape. So this is going to be really lovely and easy to train into a fan shape. Now, before we can train it, we need some supports to tie the branches in, and the ideal support system for fan training is some canes in a triangular shape, and this will give us a structure that we can tie all of the branches onto. For fan training, a triangular structure like this is ideal. It gives you plenty of places that you can tie your branches in at any level, whereas if you've got horizontal supports, it can be harder to get the angles just exactly right. Now, this tree was got with fan training in mind, so we've already trimmed off those 2 lower branches, the one little tiny spindly one and the one that was pointing away to the back. So all of our branches are already on that same lovely plane. So all we need to do is tie these in to our desired shape. So fan training is completely up to you. You can have as many branches as you would like. Now, you could start with the first layer all the way horizontal, but I like to have it just up a little bit. So again, we're going to tie a nice soft piece of twine or some rubber wrapped wire, something that's nice and soft, onto the support, and then just tie the branches on. Now, you do want to try and keep it nice and symmetrical, so whatever angle you tie one side, you want to tie the other side at the same angle. Now you can see that this branch here is not just a perfect dead straight line. If you wanted to be really pernickety, you could get another cane and tie it diagonally and tie that branch into the cane. Don't force it, don't really wrench it. You can cause splitting, you can even accidentally break your branches off. So it's better to just start it a little bit and come back in a few weeks and see if it'll give me a bit more give. Remember, this is a tree, it's a natural living organism. You can't wave a magic wand and make the branches come exactly where you want and be perfectly mathematically straight. Don't think of it in those terms, all right? Just think of it as trying to be symmetrical, trying to be aesthetically pleasing. This is working with nature, not putting nature in a corset. You can see it's taking up very little space. If you're growing this against a wall or a fence, it's hardly taking up any more space than just the wall or the fence on its own. So it's a fantastic option to let you grow a lot of fruit in a really small space that looks absolutely fabulous at the same time. So those are the initial steps for fan training a more mature fruit tree. Now what you do next depends on what type of tree you are using. So if it is a spur-bearing fruit tree, apples, pears, quinces, crab apples, or a partial spur-bearing fruit tree, your plums and your sweet cherries, you can keep those 4 branches, and then in the course of the growing season, as your tree naturally starts to sprout new branches, you can choose those that are in the best position and you can start to train those in to be other branches of your fan. Any that are growing to the back of the tree, pointing in the wrong direction, coming out in the wrong spot, you want to prune. If for any reason your tree is not growing branches where you want it to, generally it will. You'll be amazed how obliging they are, but if you're unlucky and it's not, you can either use that notching technique to encourage it to grow branches where you want it to, or you can even select 1 or 2 of those branches and cut them right down to just a few inches off the trunk, just above a nice bud or a nice cluster of leaves, and they will most of the time grow 2, 3 or even 4 new branches for you, and then you can train that into your structure. If you're fan training your tree from a maiden whip, it doesn't matter what type of fruit tree it is, they all start the same way. Find a nice healthy bud 30 to 40 centimeters above the level of the soil. Make a nice diagonal cut just above that bud, the same as for a cordon and for an espalier. They all start the same way. With any luck, over the course of the growing season, your little maiden is going to grow 2 or 3 or even 4 lovely new branches. So we have 3 branches here. Now, if your fruit tree is a spur-bearing or a partial spur-bearing fruit tree, you can just follow the same steps that we've just used on the mature tree. But if it is a tip-bearing fruit tree, things are slightly different. For a tip-bearing fruit tree, that's a tree that we're going to have to cut back the growth every single year to encourage new growth so that we get fruit on it. You want to start with just 2 branches. Now what you're going to do with those 2 branches is you're going to cut them nice and short, and then every year over the course of the growing season, those little short mini trunks, those little arms, are going to sprout out a whole lot of new branches for you, and those branches are what you're going to train into your fan. So if your maiden whip looks like this and has 3 branches, 1 of them has to go. So clean, sharp secateurs. You can pick any one that you like. I think these 2 here are making a lovely natural shape. So we're going to take out the top one. There we go, that's gone. So now we have just 2 branches. So what you want to do is look along the stem, and you can see we've got leaves coming out all along the stem. So you want to be going between 3 and 5 leaves up the stem, so sort of that much of a length. I think this one here looks good, and you want to cut it just above the leaf. So we'll just cut that there. So you can see we have our leaf, we have our lovely cut there. Now with any luck, this tree is now going to send out several branches from that point. This section here, that we've just cut, that is going to stay there forever. That is a little arm, a little mini sort of a trunk that is going to create new growth for us every year. So each year as we cut it back, this section is going to stay. So we'll just do the same on the other side, again wanting to keep them roughly even. So there we go. There is the start of our fan training for our little maiden whip. Now you will be amazed how quickly this sends up new branches. Now in the first season you maybe only get 2 or 3 branches coming out of each side, and maybe you want more branches than that in your fan. Don't panic. Next year, when it's time to cut it, you'll be cutting those branches that have grown, and then each of those branches is going to send out 2 or 3 more. So until you have the number of branches in your fan that you like, you just keep cutting and letting grow and cutting and letting grow. I will do separate videos on how to prune your fan train fruit trees, so don't panic about that. All you need to do at this stage, if you're starting with a maiden whip, is let those 2 or 3 branches grow, cut them back to 2 branches, and then cut those 2 branches short. Those 2 branches then need to be left to grow, and it's those new bits of growth that are going to give you your first fruit. So you wait until after they have fruited, and then you can prune them and cut them again, and that's going to encourage the next round of growth. Now I should mention, if you're growing your fruit tree in a pot, don't forget you are that tree's mummy. It is completely dependent on you for all of its food and all of its water, so make sure that you give it plenty of TLC. It is a bit more effort to grow a tree in a pot than it is to stick it in the ground, just because you really have to be on top of the watering. But if you do, it is so fantastically rewarding, and it's a brilliant way to save space and to be able to take your fruit trees with you if you have to move. So that is it. That is how you cordon, espalier and fan train a tree from a mature tree or from a maiden whip. I know there has been a lot of information in this video, but it really is important to understand what type of tree you have, how it's going to grow, so that you can get the best from your fruit trees. Really, it is so easy. Once you start doing it, you'll be training every plant that you possibly can. It's a fantastic way to space. It's a fantastic way to save space. They look amazing in the garden, and the amount of fruit that you get from these is just unbelievable. This is our pear tree that we've had for years. Pear trees can fruit for hundreds of years. These are an incredible tree, and look how much fruit you get in such a tiny space. Growing fruit trees is just the most amazingly rewarding thing, and when you train them, they take up so little space in the garden. We really can all make room for them. So I really hope that you will have a go at some of these training techniques. I hope you do really well with them. Let me know how you get on in the comments, ask me any questions, and I will look forward to seeing you in my future videos. So thank you so much for watching, and happy gardening.